Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for our 23rd episode of the Restaurant Dealmaker Show, where we discuss pertinent topics regarding the food and beverage industry with industry professionals. Today, we are very excited in having two of the top restaurateurs in California, Larry and Michael Mandell, a dynamic father and son team. I will highlight both Larry's and Michael's backgrounds before we get into the heart of our show. Also, if you have questions during the show, please go to the question bar and enter your question, and during the show, Larry and Michael will respond to them. Larry Mandell, a legend in the industry. Larry, originally from Toledo, Ohio, started his career in San Francisco with the purchase of Caswell Coffee for $1 million, which he borrowed from a bank in 1963 when he was 23 years old. He introduced Kona Coffee to Caswell and eventually sold the company. I first got to meet Larry many years ago as we used Caswell Coffee at Zim's Restaurants, our family business. Larry got interested in the restaurant business as many of his customers were restaurant owners. Larry took over a small failing Italian restaurant in Los Angeles called Chianti, which he bought with Jerry Magnan, his partner, and turned it into one of the most popular Italian restaurants in Los Angeles. Larry then created Spectrum Foods with 14 trend-setting restaurants, primarily in the San Francisco Bay Area, including Ciao, Prego, Guaymas, MacArthur Park, and Harry's Bar, which he sold to Saga Foods. Larry then became president of Saga's restaurant group, where he directed the operations of more than 200 restaurants with $375 million in revenue, and then Saga was bought by Marriott. When Saga was acquired, Larry founded the Il Fornaio chain, which was then a very small money-losing bakery chain with maybe half a dozen units or less, which he transformed into a 22-unit powerhouse chain, generating $145 million in annual sales, with each restaurant, averaging over $5 million in sales. He eventually took that public and then took it private, which we'll discuss shortly. Larry then opened Poggio in Sausalito, one of the finest Italian restaurants in the region, in 2003, and then partnered with renowned chef Joanne Weir and opened Copita a few doors down the street from Poggio. Larry also opened Convivo in Santa Barbara and just recently opened their second Copita in the Willow Glen section of San Jose. Michael graduated from UC Berkeley and then moved to Chicago for a couple of years, working with the Levy organization, one of the top restaurant operators in the Midwest. He moved back home to San Francisco in 1988 and then worked at Chiat Day Advertising for a couple of years. He then joined Il Fornaio as a food server in 1990 and then was a manager in training in 1991. He then became a manager of the San Francisco Il Fornaio at Levi's Plaza in the city. Then he became the director of retail bakeries for Il Fornaio's retail bakeries, and then director of marketing and senior vice president of marketing for 22 years through 2017. Michael started Restaunomics in 2017, which helps restaurants navigate and manage every facet of restaurant operations, finance, marketing, IT, and research and design. Michael also is currently a partner with Larry in their current restaurant operations, Poggio, the two Covitas, and Convivo. I had the opportunity of working with my father at Zim's Restaurants for many years, which I found to be a wonderful experience. I wanted to know what it's been like for both Larry and Michael working together for over 30 years. Larry, you want to go first?
I'd be happy to. Creating restaurants is an exciting way to live your life and hopefully make some money. But as you get older, there does come a time where getting on another plane to go to another place to talk to a landlord about building a new restaurant doesn't quite have the wonderfulness it had when you were in your 40s or 50s. And at about the time I was passing my 75th birthday, Michael was doing really interesting things, and one of them was he was asked by another restaurant company to come up to Seattle and help run their restaurants. And when he told me that, of course, my heart sunk. I didn't want my son to go to Seattle. And we figured out a way he could come into the family business. And from that point forward, he has become more and more the face of our family business, which I got to tell you is one of the greatest thrills of my life, because there's nothing like the joy of being able to talk about business problems with your son over a cup of coffee in the morning, have a glass of wine with him at night, and talk about opportunities. And especially with somebody as bright as Michael and as now experienced as Michael. So from that point of view, it truly is one of the great blessings of my life.
Wow, that sounds very nice. And Michael, what are your thoughts regarding working together all these years with your dad?
Well, it's a unique joy to be able to work with your family. It's not without its challenges as well. We've been working together for 30 years formally when I started my career at Il Fornaio back in 1990. But prior to that, I basically, like you did, Steve, grew up in my father's restaurants. So going back to restaurants that he was opening in the 1970s, I was scurrying around on the construction site. I was helping put together back bars and just hanging out with restaurant people from a very young age. So it was a very natural process for me to join him when I did at Il Fornaio. But it wasn't without trying to see if there weren't other businesses that might provide a career for myself. But I kept realizing each time I took a new job at some other company that my heart was really in the restaurant business. And I was really excited to work with my father and all the people that he surrounded himself with to help build the couple dozen restaurants that we ultimately opened together.
Sure. Yeah. That reminds me of, how my father sort of encouraged me to get in the business. When I was like 8 years old, he would bring me into the restaurants on Saturday and have me make milkshakes and root beer floats, before we even opened, just to get into it, and then go into the kitchen and double grind meat and make patties by hand. And so he was indoctrinating me at a very early age. So before I knew it, I was hooked. And I'm glad I did it, because it was a great experience working with my father and building the business together.
Well, hanging out in restaurants was a lot more fun than school work, I got to tell you. So being able to do all the things that you just said, and the idea that you could make milkshakes and ice cream floats would seal the deal for me.
And especially because you could drink them as well.
Yeah.
Which is really nice. So Larry, I want to ask you a few questions. First of all, what are your key philosophies that led to your continued success throughout your personal and business career?
Well, I like to win, and losing terrifies me. And so with this emotion percolating in my body, I would work as hard as it took and as long as it took, and try and figure out everything I possibly could so that that restaurant would succeed. Because from the beginning, they didn't always succeed. So the terrifying part would sneak into me. And so I think that just winning, and that means making a successful restaurant, one that people love, has been my motivation. I don't know if that is a complete answer.
I think you hit home with the essence of your success.
Well, I think that also there the negative to my going in the restaurant business was that I had no idea how to run a restaurant. I had no idea how restaurants ran. So when I opened the first restaurant, I was completely dependent on the people that we hired. And when you are dependent on other people for the success of your enterprise, you have to develop a series of things that keep those people motivated and happy in the job they have. Because if they weren't there, you wouldn't know what to do.
Agreed.
So,
I mean, what I traditionally, when we're writing up an offer for a going concern business, I always emphasize to the buyer, and they confirm it, that the people are the staff is the biggest asset of the business. Keeping the staff, they bring in the customers, that they're the face of the business.
And knowing that, I think that you manage yourself a little bit different, because you're indebted to them. You want them to be happy because they make your customers happy. They make the food. And I've been really, really lucky, because over these past millions of years, we found great people who have done more than I would have expected. And that's why the restaurant succeeded. Maybe some of them, I had a dream of what that restaurant could be. And of course, negotiating with a landlord, it was always difficult, but I loved the back and forth. But it's really the people in the restaurant that make it tick.
Absolutely. And you sort of gave me a segue to the next question I was going to ask you, and that is, how have you dealt with the wide range of landlords you've had over the years? And what are your thoughts regarding having an amicable relationship with your landlord, who is to some extent a partner with you in business? How have you dealt with all these different unique personalities?
Well, that's a great question, because what I've found is that most of our landlords, not all, but most of our landlords are pretty good guys. And they want you to succeed, because if you succeed, they're going to succeed. And several of them turned out to be really good friends of mine, and I turned out to be a good friend of theirs. As a matter of fact, the reason we have a restaurant in Santa Barbara is because the landlord there, the man that owned the property and was going to build a restaurant, was also our landlord at the Il Fornaio in Carmel, California. And then he called me one day. He said, "I've got this great location, and I own the land, and I want to build a restaurant. And I would like you to have the restaurant, to lease the restaurant." I told him that I wasn't interested in owning a restaurant in Santa Barbara. I was happy where our restaurants were. The opening Il Fornaios all over the place took a lot out of me, and I wasn't anxious to get back on planes. But I did offer to come down and tell him what general contractor to use, who should design the kitchen, who should design the interior, everything I knew to help him get his restaurant built. And he did hire all the same people that we would have used, and the same architect that we use. I gave him that too. And lo and behold, the restaurant was close to being finished, but he couldn't get a tenant. And then sort of at the 11th hour, he found a tenant, and he thought he had made a deal. But when the bell rang at 12 o'clock and he was opening the restaurant, the guy backed out.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So I flew down again and looked at what got built. And I actually had gone down a couple of times to be what little service I could to him. And finally, at the end, he said, "Larry, please, you got to help me. You got to take this restaurant." And he wrote a lease, and we signed the lease, and that's why we have a very successful restaurant in Santa Barbara. But that's just an example of how being close to a landlord pays dividends in many, many ways, not least of which it makes the relationship a joy.
Well said. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
It's not, it wasn't always that way. Believe me, we have
Yes.
went the other way.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
But the
I
ones
do.
I remember are the happy ones.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I hear you loud and clear on that. I've heard you have a very close relationship with your family, which is very admirable. And I want them to, and I know you have this philosophy, you want them to live no further than 15 minutes from you. How's this played out?
Well, it's one of the most successful things that's ever happened to me. And from a personal point of view, it's the most joyous. All of them live within 15 minutes of us.
Wow.
And
how many of you altogether?
Well, we have 5 kids and 11 grandkids.
Wow.
So there's 16.
Nice. Very nice.
And the what you get from that are just like the things I said about Michael. It's such a joy to be able to sit with him and talk business over coffee in the morning or having a glass of wine at night.
Yeah.
And I see Michael every day.
Yeah.
And then it's also great when one of the kids said, "Hey, I'm cooking this tonight. How about coming over for dinner?" And that happens every week or twice a week.
That's nice. That's nice.
And so it's probably worked out better than I ever dreamed it could.
Yeah.
Because in my life, our family is everything.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm blessed similarly. I have 5 grandchildren within 5 minutes of me. 2 of my kids live within 5 minutes. And then my third child, God, he lives in Walnut Creek, 40 minutes away. And he has a grandson. We have a grandson with him. And but 40 minutes, and you talk to people, and they have kids grandkids all over the country, or our country, or in different countries. So we're very blessed, to be in this kind of a situation, needless to say. So another question I want to ask you, Larry. I know you took IL FORNAIO public with an IPO in 1997, and then you took it private again in 2001. Could you tell us briefly what that was all about?
Well, I think honestly, I think going public was a little bit about ego. I mean, I remember I'm just a little guy from Toledo, Ohio, and to think that we had a company. I think then it was doing about 150 million a year, and a lot of reputable investment bankers thought it would make a great IPO. And I thought about it a lot. It was actually the second time that the investment bankers had thought about taking it public. The first time, I thought we were so ill-equipped to be a public company that we didn't do it. This time, I felt we were pretty mature and had a really, really solid management team. And I thought we should do it. And it would, again, ego played a big part in it. But more importantly, it monetized the company. when you have 25, 30 restaurants, you really don't know how to value what you've got. And the way to value that is to do what we did. We went public and it monetized the company. The public told us exactly what it was worth. And so from that point of view, it was a good idea. The bad part was that I came to learn that our shareholders expected us to build several restaurants every year and grow at that pace. And this is at that time really a hands-on business. I negotiated every lease. I spent time with prospective landlords to get to know them. I mean, there was one year I was on a plane 48 out of 52 weeks. And because the location and the people and the concept were really had to work all together in wherever it was, Del Mar, somewhere. And but that really resulted in a 1 or maybe 2 new restaurants a year. And what our shareholders wanted was more like 6 or 8 or 10 a year. And Il Fornaio was just never a rubber stamp kind of operation. It was a onesie twosie thing. And we weren't going to open another one until the one we just opened was perfect. And I wanted it to be perfect. So our stock, it didn't languish, but it wasn't a hot thing. And mainly because in those days, Silicon Valley and the bursting out of companies doing great technology, great things related to technology, those were the hottest stocks, and restaurant stocks were not. But mostly it was about how many restaurants we had to build each year to make everybody happy, and I couldn't do that. So we went private, and that was fine too. Now, when we went private, I also sold some of my stock. So that was also a nice thing for me.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting. Michael, switching over to you. In working with your dad in business, did you feel you had to work harder than anyone else to prove yourself and overcome any concerns business associates perhaps felt because of nepotism?
Well, it really never entered my mind very often. I didn't see a lot of people treat me any differently because, again, I'd known so many of the people that were involved in Il Fornaio from previous restaurants, previous companies that they worked with my father in. So I knew a lot of people pretty well. But ultimately, in the environment that we're in, restaurant people judge each other by how much they contribute and how hard they work and how well they get along with the many other people that are needed to make a restaurant successful. So my feeling was, as long as I was contributing and working hard and getting along and being helpful, that it really wouldn't become too much of an issue. I mean, perhaps later on, as Il Fornaio grew and became a much bigger company, and the roles that I was serving in became a little bit more executive in their function. There was probably some potential that people on the outside, whether we were, preparing for the roadshow for the IPO, or people that weren't familiar with the dynamic within our organization, might suspect that there was some nepotism at play. But we had a really great management team, and I feel like I was just part of that team. And it just so happened that my name was also the same name as the CEO. So it really didn't I never noticed it. Potentially, it was people might have had those thoughts, but I really saw very little of it because we were, we were growing quickly and we were successful. So people seemed to appreciate what I was doing, regardless of what my name was.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of that attitude was a result of, the fact you did a good job and you worked really hard and you set an example for everyone. I know for me, I started washing dishes when I was 15, going to high school part-time, and then cooked part-time and weekends and part-time during the summers all through high school, and worked my way up through the various ranks. And even when I got out of college, I started as an assistant manager and worked my way up, and people appreciated the fact that I, paid my dues like you did. And you
it's super helpful to know every aspect of the restaurant operation. And so even when I was the director of marketing, if we had a manager shortage, which we did on occasion in restaurants, I could be dispatched to that location and be able to, work some shifts and help that restaurant operate. And so and we did that all the time. So there was not a lot of differentiation between anybody in the company, regardless of what your name or your title was. That's for sure.
Yeah, the same for me. If something had to be done, I jumped in and did it without any questions. Another question for you. Of all the different things you've done throughout your business career, what event has been the most gratifying?
For me, I think surviving the COVID was probably the most gratifying. I'm sure every restaurant person on the planet remembers what things were like back in March of 2020 when you did it. You had no idea what was going to happen, how long you were going to be closed, how you were going to be able to support your staff, and the level of uncertainty was something that none of us had ever experienced before. So as we started to pivot and figure out our way forward, it was really gratifying to see how the teams responded, how much people looked out for one another. And for the most part, the response of our communities was overwhelmingly positive. And so it really brought together our teams and our communities in a way that you thought might exist, but was never truly tested like it was during the pandemic. And so to be able to sit here today and say that we've got, 4 thriving restaurants, it feels, every so often we think back and we reflect on those times and it feels like a miracle. So that was very, very gratifying.
That's nice. Nice to hear. You recently opened a new Copita in San Jose in the Willow Glen area. And I know it was a built-to-suit, which means it wasn't a restaurant. You had to create it from scratch. And I'm sure in the past you've done some conversions from second-generation restaurants into your concept. So what were some of the key issues that came about doing a build-to-suit versus doing a conversion of an existing, restaurant?
Well, the number one challenge, I think, for any operator is the costs of construction over the last couple of years have just skyrocketed. And so, we signed the lease for the Willow Glen Copita in 2021, right as inflation was starting to take off. And so with every passing week and month that we were in the process of gathering bids, negotiating with subcontractors, and looking at purchasing kitchen equipment, every time we turned around, the price went up significantly. And it was very challenging from a cost and construction standpoint. The other thing with new restaurants is there's no infrastructure generally. So first generation restaurants, there's no HVAC, there's no plumbing, there's no electrical. And, getting back to that first point, all of those things take talented people. And to do that from scratch has become exponentially more expensive than converting a restaurant that already has all of that infrastructure in place. And the last thing is that the permits that are required for a new restaurant are those prices have gone up as well. And to be able to secure those permits is also not easy. We had to do what's called a double transfer on a liquor license. It was a license that was switching counties and switching locations.
Mm.
In the ABC's eyes, that needs to be extra difficult. So it was a long process. So anytime something takes as long as construction or permitting does, it adds expense to the project, and that's ultimately what our experience was.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you're glad you have that behind you. So that's obviously going to influence your decision as to any future units that you pursue, I would assume. Yeah.
Most definitely. I don't think that we're going to be spending a lot of focus looking at first generation locations, although the upside to first generation or build to suits is that you get to start with a clean sheet of paper, which I don't want to speak for my father, but that was always his preference, where you get to design the restaurant
Right.
you imagine as opposed to the one that you inherit.
Yeah. Yeah. You make a bigger impact, I think, to your customer base because it's a whole new experience, versus a retrofit. And even how you retrofit a restaurant, whether it be, smoke and mirrors, cosmetics, the name, et cetera, it doesn't have the same impact. And generally speaking, you don't have the degrees of efficiencies because you're inheriting, especially in the kitchen. To retrofit a kitchen is difficult to maximize, efficiency. But you're building something from scratch, so you take that into consideration and make the plan as efficient as possible, and at the same time get the biggest impact from the consumer point of view because it's a whole new experience. So there are definitely pluses and minuses going both ways because we've done both. And so I can identify with what you said for sure. Larry, what is your favorite part of the restaurant business?
Oh, that's easy. The people.
Okay.
So it's all about the people.
So when you say the people, you're talking about the customers, the vendors, and the employees, the whole schmear.
The whole schmear. I got in when I sold the coffee company. It was a difficult time after the sale, and I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. The one thing I knew I wanted most of all is to be around good people, and not locked up in some fancy office somewhere with 8 people around. And I wanted to be with the people, and it's been another blessing for me.
So when Il Fornaio was going full bore and you were at your peak of operational involvement, what would a typical day be for you, like in the Il Fornaio world?
Well, I had an assistant. This will give you an idea, who one day came to me and she said, "Larry, do you realize that this year, just ending, you were on an airplane 48 out of 52 weeks?" And I had no idea I'd done that. Excuse me. So a typical day, there were no typical days.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd go to this restaurant or that restaurant, or I'd talk to this landlord or that landlord. I'd go to another, the East Bay, the West Bay, and or even New York.
Yeah.
Just looking for good landlords with a great location that we could build another perfect restaurant.
Yeah. And
so I don't think any of the days were very normal.
Yeah, I got it. I hear you. I've already asked Michael, what was the most challenging thing for him in his career, and I was sort of curious to know what your take is on that. What event or events have been the most challenging in your restaurant career, and how did you deal with these challenges?
Well, that is relatively easy to me. the biggest challenges were things like having a lot of confidence and friendship with people you work with. And then one day you find out that one of the people that you're working closely with, as a friend and as a business associate, you know, was harassing an employee, a girl, and then eventually having to fire him. I think that's one of the more difficult things I've ever had to do. And unfortunately, it happened more than once.
Yeah.
So you have such great respect and admiration for people, and sometimes you get disappointed, and you have to do something about it because it affects your company.
Yes.
And I think the one or two times, or maybe three, that's happened to me, it's been very, very difficult.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I've had similar
You're not only losing a key employee, you're also losing what you thought to be a great friend.
Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, those kind of issues do arise. Yeah, very much so. Michael, what are your strongest areas of expertise in business, and how do you use those strengths to overcome the major challenges of the business?
Well, I think that, you know, the strengths that I try to bring to the table are creativity and problem solving. The role that I have, at least in the 4 restaurants that we are currently operating, is to help them so that the management team can spend more time with their guests and their employees, and the chefs can spend more time in the kitchens and not so much having to worry about some of the more mundane tasks that need to take place, whether it's accounting or record keeping or anything that's going to require them to be in front of a computer, which is, you know, they need to do, and we need to be able to teach them how to do these things. But I'm trying to make it as easy for them as possible to focus on taking care of our guests, and that's worked really well, at least in our restaurants. And then prior at Il Fornaio, I was in charge of the marketing department, and over the last 25 years, marketing restaurants and marketing in general went through a complete transformation from traditional media and public relations to online and digital and social media. So one of the things that taught me over that time was to be flexible, be creative, be open-minded, and don't behave as if you've got everything, all the answers or everything figured out. Because if you think that, then something is going to come along and dissuade you from that opinion pretty quickly.
Sure. Yeah, good answer. So what changes do you see in the restaurant industry in California because of the current economic challenges we face today? You know, the shortage of employees, the high operating costs, you know, product costs, occupancy costs, insurance costs, you know, all the expenses. How do you deal with all those challenges today? You know,
Well,
about minimum wage, I guess, you know, for chains, 60 or more units, minimum wage in California is going to go to $20 an hour.
yeah, well, there's going to be a ballot initiative this November to raise the minimum wage, and it's going to pass because it always does.
Yes.
And so we are, you know, restaurant people are resilient and creative, and it is no question going to be a challenge. But you listed off, you know, a half a dozen challenges that we've been dealing with forever. So there's always going to be a shortage of talented, committed people. It's always going to be tough to, you know, manage costs so that you can be successful. But it seems to have gotten a lot harder over the last couple of years. It was an interesting exercise to open a restaurant in the sort of what we're calling post-COVID environment. And there are hidden expenses in restaurant operations now that have really skyrocketed, and you named a couple of them. The obvious ones are the challenges with staff and wages, and labor, but the less obvious ones, which are hidden from most restaurant customers, have to do with insurance costs, which have skyrocketed. And as a restaurant, you need workers' comp insurance, you need general and liability insurance. So insurance, just getting insurance is a challenge these days. And then paying for that is astronomically more expensive than it was just a couple of years ago. And same thing with utilities. The utility costs in California, I think everybody that lives in California has seen their utility bill skyrocket. Well, imagine that the impact that that's having on a small restaurant, and the ability to just break even or have a little bit of money left over at the end of the year has become really difficult.
Yeah. So operators are forced to unfortunately raise prices, and even they can't offset their cost dollar for dollar with increased prices. They got to maintain price value, even upscaled restaurant like you operate. So I guess do you think customers are less sensitive to price increases in a more upscaled environment than they are in let's say a lower scale concept?
I do. But at the same time, I mean, it depends on your audience, it depends on your offering, and it depends on how good you are in providing value that people appreciate. I mean, that's always been, my father's philosophy, is that, at the end of a meal, when you drop that check, people do a little mini P&L of that experience. They say, was that worth it? Did I enjoy it? They're looking at that bottom line, and then they're making that decision about whether they want to come back or not. And so, every day it's a battle to make sure that we are providing a great experience, professional, beautiful environment with really great food. And the good news is that our customers let us know about it in many different ways about how well we're doing. And so we feel pretty good about the relationship that we have with our guests, and for the most part, they've understood some of the price increases that we have had to take over the last couple of years. But I'll tell you, we do get occasional, emails and comments about how much they appreciate how hard we are trying not to raise our prices or get to a point where we're putting something on the plate that doesn't have the value that people have come to love about the restaurants that we operate.
Yeah, good answer. Larry, of all the many accomplishments you've achieved throughout your career, and there have been too many to even mention, what single accomplishment is the most meaningful to you? If you can narrow it down to a single accomplishment.
I think, well, from a commercial side, and I think I've already said this, the accomplishment of being a public company, to me, coming from where I came from, was a great accomplishment. But I think the greatest, and I can't call it an accomplishment, I'll just say it's the most fortunate thing that happened, was to be able and to be in a position where my son could join the company and provide new eyes, new leadership, and certainly knows more about technology, which is one of my weaker, of many weak areas. That's probably the weakest, and continue the family business to thrive and to grow. And I just think that's an incredible blessing.
Yeah. And that's a nice segue to the next question, to Michael. Where is the restaurant industry going technologically? And what technology have you adopted in your restaurant, and how has it impacted operations?
I was going to recommend you ask him that question.
Yes, yes, that question is definitely a Michael question.
Well, I appreciate that, guys. But one of the things that I learned from my father is to try to go find people that are even smarter than you about these things. And so, you know, we haven't mentioned it so far, but this is actually a 3-generation operation, because
Right.
my oldest son is now working for my company, and he manages all of our social media, online presence, and digital marketing. And, you know, at 27 years old, he knows volumes more than I do about the latest technology, how it's being used, and how it can influence the business at our restaurants. So as I mentioned earlier, the technology is changing seemingly every week. There are new platforms to attend to, but we have a pretty good sense of which ones move the needle the most for our restaurants. And, you know, and we see it every day. So we are using technology every day, whether it's review sites, social media, email marketing, you name it. We take advantage of just about the entire menu of technology opportunities out there, but really try to focus on the ones that are most meaningful to us. And that typically for most restaurants involves the social media channels like Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and to a lesser extent, X, or formerly known as Twitter.
Right, right. Okay. Larry, if a new person is thinking about coming into the restaurant business, what advice would you give them? They're thinking about getting into the restaurant business. They've never been in it before. What would you say to them?
Well, I'm fond of saying that a restaurant is really like a 3-legged stool that you sit on, a 3-legged bar stool, let's say. And all 3 legs have to be perfect. One leg is great food. Another leg is superb service. And the third leg is an appropriate environment that you've built. And if one of those legs isn't there, then the bar stool gets wobbly. If two legs aren't there, the bar stool will fall over. And a restaurant is the same way. You have to have everything in order. It all has to work, and it has to work together to be successful. So if you are up for the challenge of doing virtually a perfect restaurant, and you know those 3 legs will be strong, you ought to do it. But think about each leg and think about what it takes to make all 3 legs strong, and see if that's an undertaking you're really ready to do.
Got it. Michael, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I mean, I get asked all the time because there are people that come to us and just want to, they know what we've done and ask questions about what it's like to open a restaurant and that they're contemplating doing it. And my standard responses are very similar to what my father said, but the most important thing that I tell them is you really have to love people. I mean, there's no way around the fact that your patience, your financial underpinning, your entire being are going to be tested by the people that are coming into your restaurant every day, including your team, your guests, your vendors. And so you need to be prepared to deal with a very wide range of personalities, some of which you may like and some of which you may not care for, and really have a mentality of service, that you are there to serve your guests, you're there to help your team, you're there to help your vendors make a living. And if you have that mentality, then you have a chance. You have, far from a guarantee, but you have a chance. And then you can get to those things like, what's your menu going to look like? What do you envision for a design? And, you know, oftentimes people, they start with those things and they don't really look inward about what is driving them to this desire to open a restaurant. And usually after I have that conversation, they have rethought whether or not they want to be in this business.
Absolutely.
Some do ignore or actually take some of that advice. And I have to tell you, one of the great joys that I get to experience is to see all the people that my father has helped over the years go on to be very successful restaurateurs. You know, here in the Bay Area, there are dozens of people that at one point or another were partners with my father, who have since gone on to open up extraordinary restaurants in the Bay Area and beyond, and that's very gratifying.
Yes, we've had the same experience. So the number of managers, people that started with us, actually some dishwashers, and worked their way up the ranks through cooking and managing, and they went off on their own and have done very well. And that's very gratifying to see that, to say the least. Anyway, well, your words of wisdom for both of you have been very, very meaningful and very helpful. And I'm sure anybody that is tuned into this program today has learned a lot. And it reaffirms to me a lot of the basic principles that are so important to be successful in this business that you guys have so well, you know, discussed. And so if someone, Michael, if someone wants to get in touch with you for whatever reason, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah. So, but first of all, I respond to every single email that we get on our restaurant's website. So that's generally how most people reach me, but definitely via email directly to me, mike@restaunomics.com. Always happy to talk to prospective or current restaurateurs. And in fact, our company Restaunomics consults with a number of them. So if there's ever somebody that just wants to chat about what's going on at their restaurant or what they're thinking about for their next restaurant, I'm always happy to do that.
Great. And similarly, Larry, if someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Same way, email. It's Larry, all small letters, Larry M at sausalitolarry.com.
Got it. Thank you. And again, if anyone wants,
I'll take any of the calls too.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. And again, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I'm at steve@restaurantrealty.com. Our next Restaurant Dealmaker shows are as follows. February 22nd, Dean Biersch, the co-founder of Gordon & Biersch, and currently the owner of Hot Monk Tavern locations, will be our co-host. March 28th, John Sangmeister, the owner of Gladstone's Seafood in Long Beach, and also the past winner of the Trans-Pac sailing race between California and Hawaii, which is an unusual accomplishment. In April 24th, Steve Mayer, the managing partner of SD Mayer & Associates, one of the largest hospitality accounting and consulting practices in the area, will be our co-host. And on May 30th, Heidi Kraling, chef owner of the award-winning Ensalada Mediterranean restaurant in San Anselmo. So in closing, I want to express my grateful thank you to both you, Larry, and Michael, for your candid and very insightful input. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners learned a lot as well. And so thank you very much for your time. I want to say to the audience, thank you for joining us today, and take care of yourself and take care of others, and stay well. Again, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Take care. Stay well.
Thanks.